What's up, friends? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. If you have not subscribed yet, you can do so right below. Would greatly appreciate that. But either way, thank you so much for being here. Let's kick things off before we get into the grades and the film review with the press conferences from Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst. Not a ton of major takeaways, despite it being the first time we've heard from Goody since the offseason. Let's start with Matt LaFleur. Probably the biggest thing that we could glean from this entire press conference day was simply the injury updates. Most importantly, Aaron Jones and Romeo Doubs sound like they're both going to be good to go following the bye week. This offense has shown some serious signs over the last month and has really gained some momentum, in large part because of the offensive line, which we're going to discuss in a little bit. Christian Watson, a massive part of this, but keeping Aaron Jones intact and the fact that he doesn't have some sort of major injury, but also hopefully finally seeing Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson. I know we've seen them together a little bit, but not when they've been firing on all cylinders together. The opportunity for these two players to kind of see through this season and hopefully perform at a high level together for what we all think can be an extremely highly talented, dynamic duo for the foreseeable future. I think that's probably one of the best takeaways that we can get from the remainder of the year. And it's just going to be really great to see those two guys on the field at the same time. So most important news, both those guys should be back following the bye week. The not so great news is David Bakhtiari. And with Bakhtiari, it's not great. It sounds like he is going to be out a while, which is not what you want to hear. And while I don't even necessarily want to let my mind go here, there's only 4 games left in the season. And we've already talked about, and we're going to talk about it more in just a second with Brian Gutekunst's comments, but this is a very difficult contract for Brian Gutekunst. And you have to weigh out in the offseason, the risk reward. His knee is hanging on by a thread, and his injury has basically had repeated issues. He woke up one game day, and it just wasn't good to go. That is a ton of money that you have to pay that player where there's constant injury concerns with his knee moving forward. The appendix removal, that's just like Brian Gutekunst basically said snake bit, right? There's nothing you can do about that. It doesn't really play a factor, but what a bummer that he was playing so great. I mean, so great. Just phenomenal football. And here he has an appendectomy, and now he could miss maybe the remainder of the season. And there's a non-zero chance that could unfortunately be it for Bakhtiari in Green Bay. Like I said, don't even want my mind to go there because he's been such an amazing Green Bay Packer, and I certainly don't want his career in Green Bay to end that way. And hopefully he can get back this season. It was not announced as a season-ending injury, but Matt LaFleur said it could be a while before they see Bakhtiari. Well, there's only 4 games left in the season, so that's not exactly what you want to hear. Again, very much hoping that we see Bakhtiari back in green and gold in some capacity, some way, some shape, some form, because again, all-time favorite Green Bay Packer for me and just a phenomenal football player. But we just have to also be realistic, which is what you're always going to get from me. And this show is realism. It's not always going to be cheery. It's not always going to be bright. It's not always going to be sexy, but it's always going to be as real as possible. And if we're being totally real, if Bakhtiari doesn't end up playing again this season, or even if he's ready to go, week 18, and the Packers are eliminated from the playoffs, do they let him go out there? These are all things that are going to have to be considered for the remainder of this year and moving forward. Like I said, my hope is that we have not seen the last of David Bakhtiari, but if we're being real, that opportunity now exists, which just totally and completely sucks. So now that we've got that fun piece out of the way, let's talk about some of the things. Both Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur were asked about Aaron Rodgers' comments saying there needs to be mutual interest. And as you would expect, both of them said, we absolutely want Aaron Rodgers back and we made a long-term investment in him. And Brian Gutekunst gave his usual comment of we want all of our players back, which of course is BS. You don't always want all of your players back. Probably 40% of the roster gets churned basically every single year. So it's just GM speak. But both of them went on the record saying they want Rodgers back. So, but Gutekunst did, LaFleur was more clear about it. Gutekunst did use some GM speak and said that's more of an off-season decision and things like that. So, listen, this is just classic GMs. Like they have to make long-term decisions, and there's no way at this point that, what do you want him to say, right? What is he going to say? Yeah, we probably don't think he's going to be back with 4 games left. That's all you can say for both LaFleur and Gutekunst in that situation. Even if they knew, like, yeah, we're going to move on. Like, there's no way you can say that. So we learned nothing from either of their answers, even though both of them said, yeah, we clearly want Rodgers back next season. And I think that with Brian Gutekunst's comments of like how big of an investment they made and that it's a long-term investment and that they, he wanted to make that decision. He thinks it's the right decision. I think that there's probably some truth in it, but it's probably going to be another one of those off seasons when we already have Aaron Rodgers talking about mutual interest on, early December, and Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur are already getting questions about what Rodgers is going to do in the offseason. It probably lends itself to this conversation being a long offseason. Again, the season is going to probably be done at the very beginning of January. Rodgers usually doesn't make his decision until, before the draft or right around, I should say more free agency time period, I guess I should say. So, you're probably looking at another, almost 3-month period where Rodgers is going to probably be weighing this thing out and dragging this thing out again. So just buckle up, do the Jair Alexander seatbelt. Yes, by the way, for those of you who have commented on Twitter, it is a seatbelt. It is not a sword. It is not a sheath. He is on camera saying seatbelt. It has been reported by multiple people that it is a seatbelt. So it is a seatbelt and not a katana, not a sword, not anything else, but a actual seatbelt. So yes, Jair Alexander's celebration is a seatbelt celebration. So buckle in for the offseason that will be with Aaron Rodgers. As far as other comments from Brian Gutekunst did get asked about the David Bakhtiari decision, and he also mentioned that that's going to be an offseason discussion, which it just has to be, or an offseason decision, I should say, not discussion. I guess there's 2 different connotations there, but that's going to have to be an offseason decision. They did, at least Brian Gutekunst mentioned that they are going to play to win for the remainder of the season. I made mention of this the other day. There's a belief amongst many people that winning breeds winning, and I tend to be in that boat for the most part. But that's basically what he said, is that, they're in the business of winning and that it sets a standard for their culture and they want to win football games. And within that conversation also mentioned that they don't necessarily need to see Jordan Love and they want to put their best players on the field that they think they can win with. So with that in mind, that would lead you to believe that Rodgers probably starts the remainder of the season. Now with some injury issues and things like that, if Rodgers' ribs start hurting more, or if his thumb just isn't getting better and they're eliminated from playoff contention, maybe they just, common sense prevails and they go in a different direction for the remainder of the season and test out Jordan Love. But Brian was pretty clear in the fact that they've seen what they need to see from Jordan Love and feel confident in him moving forward, which is also, by the way, GM speak, because once again, what do you want him to say? Even if they don't want to keep him on the roster and move forward with him, they certainly want to generate trade interest as they move into this offseason. So with a GM, you always have to play a bit of devil's advocate and really try to read between the lines as much as you can, because just for obvious reasons, they can't always be honest, because as a GM, you don't want to tip your hand in any direction because it could hurt morale. It could hurt the locker room. It could hurt trade value for players going into this offseason. It could tip your hand to other teams of what you might do in free agency or the draft. So you have to hold your cards very close to the vest if you're a general manager, which is what we saw from Brian Gutekunst, which is why I go back to, I think overall, if you're looking for some key takeaways from Brian Gutekunst or Matt LaFleur from these press conferences, probably the biggest thing you can take away is the injury updates from Matt LaFleur, that Dobbs and Jones will be back after the bye, that Bakhtiari is going to be out a while, and everything else. Like I said, it's going to be a very interesting remainder of the season and off season, and get your Jair Alexander seatbelt ready for what will be a probably fairly tumultuous off season. Once again, who knows what will happen, but some major decisions for the future of the franchise will await ahead, but that's ahead. We've got all the time in the world to discuss that once the season is over and into the off season. I'm sure we'll touch base on it a little bit during the bye week as well, but for today, let's get into our main topic, which is, of course, every single Tuesday, and we talk about the film review and the grades and everything like that. So let's start off with the top graded players on offense for this week. My 3 highest graded players on offense: Elton Jenkins, plus 1.05, huge grade for an offensive lineman this week. Christian Watson, 0.7. Zach Tom, plus 0.65. Two rookies making the list on offense. Let's start actually with Christian Watson, because some of you might immediately jump to, holy cow, dude, he had another insane touchdown run. He had a touchdown in the back of the end zone. He's drawing a pass interference. He converts a huge third down, has a big, 18-yard reception on the opening drive of the final touchdown drive where he actually had the touchdown run. Like, how is he not getting a massive grade? How is he not the highest graded player on offense? I actually thought, going back and watching the L22, that Watson's start to this game was actually pretty tough. Wasn't gaining much separation. There were two instances, again, where he quit on routes. And that just is not acceptable. That cannot happen, especially after he's had two instances where he stopped on routes and was thrown the ball and probably could have got explosive plays out of it had he not quit on the route. So to see him not learn from those mistakes and quit on some routes early in this game was frustrating to see. But overall, once he kind of got that out of his system and as the game went along, you started to see Christian Watson use all of his talents at his disposal. The touchdown in the back of the end zone on fourth down, I actually thought, Rodgers probably could have thrown him more open on that play and used his speed a little bit more. He gained pretty much easy separation at the end of that play, and it was a nice touchdown by him. Clearly, the touchdown run was absolutely amazing. A beautifully set up play. When you're looking at for a super high grade for a player, you're looking for them to do, something that makes a player miss or something like that. Now, his pure, unadulterated, crazy speed is what was phenomenal about that play, and outrunning a player who also runs a 4.3 40, who also had a better angle on the play, could take a diagonal and still outrunning him. That's why that's such a highly graded play overall. But again, he had to make up for some of the things early in the game. Still a very, very nice game from Christian Watson. And like I said, my second highest graded player on offense. Let's go back to my highest graded player, Elton Jenkins, because this has really, really been a fun story. So let's just go through Elton Jenkins' grades on offense this year. These were his first 6 games back from injury. Negative 1.0, negative 0.9, negative 0.1, positive 0.6, negative 3.3, a brutal game in week 6, negative 0.5, for a total grade of negative 5.20 over that 6-game period. A really rough return for Elton Jenkins, who not only was returning from injury, but was going to right tackle, playing a position he was not super familiar with, and let's just say it did not go well. Now, he did play one of those games, I think the last game of that group, at left guard. They moved him back. And then he missed a game. Remember, he actually sat a game out due to injury and then came back from injury. And since then, his 5 weeks coming back from that 1-week absence, plus being back at left guard, these have been his 5 grades since then. Plus 0.5, plus 0.15, plus 0.6, plus 0.45, plus 1.05 this week, for a grade of plus 2.75 over the last 5 weeks. So first 6 weeks he played back, negative 5.2. Last 5 weeks, plus 2.75, with by far his best game coming this week against the Bears with a plus 1.05 grade this week. You know who Elton Jenkins looked like this week? Elton freaking Jenkins. This was the first game where you watched him and you said, that's Elton Jenkins. And that is exciting because he is, of course, such a talented player. And I loved everything from Jenkins this week. His footwork was better. He had a play where he utilized his punch, and it was just heavy hands right to the chest, jarred the Chicago defensive player. And that was the first time we really saw some real heavy hands from Elton Jenkins. You can tell it just took him a little bit of time to kind of get back on the bike and trust his legs a little bit more and feel like himself and just kind of work some of that rust off. This looked like Elton Jenkins. And we have to say that this is not the most talented Chicago defensive front in the world. In fact, it's a pretty bad defensive front for the Bears. I don't care. What I saw on tape from Elton Jenkins was a player who trusted himself more, who could trust his technique, who had better footwork, who had better hand placement, and just looked like Elton freaking Jenkins. And The bad news, of course, is that he's an unrestricted free agent in the offseason. We've discussed that already. We'll discuss it more ad nauseum. So the long story short here is that Brian Gutekunst is going to have an insane decision with Elgton Jenkins coming up. It would have been a much harder decision if he would have finished the year playing like he was and just having a really bad season. But these last 5 games give you legitimate signs that he is back and healthy from his leg injury finally and looks like himself, which is awesome news for A, the remainder of the season, and B, for Elgton Jenkins moving forward. Whether that's as a member of the Packers next year or not will remain to be seen, but still just love. You never want to see an injury derail a player. It looked like you had this ACL injury for Jenkins, had a phenomenal career up to that point, comes back from injury, goes to right tackle, looks nothing like himself, moves back to left guard for the first game, doesn't look like himself, sits out a week, and since coming back has looked like Elgton Jenkins. Like I said, one of the really cool stories of this season, and not super unexpected. An ACL injury takes time to come back from. A lot of people don't play up to their standard the full next season, and then it's the year after that where they really start feeling comfortable again. So it's quite possible that the best is still ahead of Elgton Jenkins if next year's actually the year that he, again, feels back to 100%. But it's just great to see him playing this way. And like I said, this was by far and away his best game of the season. And then Mr. Zach Tom, loved this game from Zach Tom. You know who he reminded me of at times? You know, an early young David Bakhtiari. Just footwork, technique, agility. The power is not always there, nor was it there for a young David Bakhtiari either. There'll be a mistake here and there. He's not moving people in the run game. He's not a mauler. He's not a physical player. He needs to put on functional strength. He needs to become a better run blocker overall. But he's such a confident player, and his footwork's good. His hand placement's good. His technique is good. He understands how to pick up twists and stunts. He's confident in the way that he plays. And I just really like him as a football player. And I think, especially after watching this game, I think there's a legitimate chance, I should say, that his best position might just be left tackle, which of course makes that David Bakhtiari decision in the offseason that much more interesting. As Brian Gutekunst said in his press conference, left tackles do not grow on trees. It's great to know that they have not only David Bakhtiari right now, and maybe David Bakhtiari into the future, but Yosh Nijman has played left tackle. Elgton Jenkins has played left tackle. And I know right tackle didn't go well, but there is a little bit of a difference from going from left guard to right tackle and left guard to left tackle. You're just bumping out. You're using a lot of your same techniques and footwork and things like that. It's a different position, no doubt about it, but it's possible that he could play left tackle. And then you've got Zach Tom as well. So they definitely have some options at the position moving forward, dependent upon what they do in the offseason with Bakhtiari and Jenkins. Yosh Nijman, a restricted free agent. I don't know why I keep wanting to get into the offseason. It's just such an easy thing to talk about, but let's stick on the grades this week. So overall, really, really impressed with Zach Tom. I thought this was by far, in a way, his best game overall as a pro, and even more impressive because he didn't go into the week last week expecting to be the starter. Bakhtiari didn't have his appendix removed until later in the week, and then he learns late in the week that he's going to start, and like I said, goes out and has his best game as a pro. This made me a believer that Zach Tom is a legitimate starting candidate moving forward. Makes me a little bit more upset that he wasn't a legitimate starting candidate earlier in the season, as kind of everyone wanted him to be, but still, all neither here nor there at this point. At this point, just happy to see him playing at a high level. Again, third highest graded player on offense this week. I just want to go over the offensive line in general because I talked to you, just now about how Elgton Jenkins, those first 6 games, negative 5.2, the last 5 games, plus 2.75. But let me talk to you about the offensive line as a whole. First of all, this week, no offensive lineman graded in the negative. And it has been a huge difference since they've gone Bakhtiari/Tom at left tackle, Jenkins at left guard, Myers at center, John Runyan Jr. at right guard, and Yosh Nijman at right tackle. They have solidified that line, and I know Bakhtiari and has missed this week, and Tom had to sub in a couple times, but that line has been a night and day difference. But overall, the first 7 weeks for this offensive line as a whole, negative 20.55. I talked to you about the poor Jenkins grade, but you had a lot of rough Jake Hansen grades in there, some really, really rough Royce Newman grades in there. Runyon didn't look like himself. Myers was up and down, and unfortunately more down than up. It was just a very, very bad start to the season. Negative 20.55 over the first 7 weeks. The last 6 weeks, plus 6.60. A night and day difference. Basically grading almost negative 3.0 per week in the negative in those first 7 weeks. Grading plus 1.1 over the last 6 weeks per week. Like I said, if they would have played like this early in the season, I know Bakhtiari coming back, Jenkins coming back, a huge reason for the resurgence of the offensive line. But man, if they would have played like this to begin the season, you're looking at a team that's probably closer to 500 right now and legitimately competing for a playoff spot. So it's disappointing to say the least that it took so long for this offensive line to find itself. Kudos to Butkus and I'm sure Stenovich as well for righting the ship and actually improving as the season has gone along, something that we have not seen a ton of from this team as a whole. This offensive line is really one of the rare ones that has actually struggled and gotten better over the course of the year. Again, getting back a healthy Bakhtiari and Jenkins will certainly help with that as well. But either way, a much better offensive line. And because of it, we've seen much better offense from this team over the course, especially the last, I would say, 4 weeks overall. At least some more explosiveness, better offensive line play, better offense as a whole. Top 3 lowest graded players on offense this week. Robert Tonyan, negative 0.6. Struggled separating from anything this week. He just couldn't. And then, even when he did catch something, there's no run after the catch ability, and he's not a great blocker. So it's a struggle for Robert Tonyan. This will probably be his last season in Green Bay, unless maybe they get him back near a vet minimum deal or something. But tough season for Robert Tonyan, also coming back from an ACL injury. Aaron Rodgers, second lowest graded player, negative 0.3. Actually thought this was kind of a low-key, really poor performance from Rodgers. Now, I say really poor. It wasn't like a crazy low grade, but there's a couple different instances where he looked away from the way that the play was set to be designed. One specifically on a drag route to Christian Watson that was very clearly set up to be a drag route to Christian Watson. Never IDs it, goes in a different direction. Watson comes wide open. And just, I don't know how to exactly analyze this completely. There's just a lot of plays with Aaron that there's a guy wide open to the left and he goes to the right. Or there's a guy wide open to the right and he looks to the left. And I can't say for sure on a lot of them what the design, like what the progression is, right? I don't know if it's very possible and probably likely with Aaron that the progression was to go left to right, and it just so happened that the guy on the right opened up first. There's definitely times where you can tell where a design of a play is supposed to go. And like I said, with the Watson one, sometimes he just decides to go in a different direction, which at some point you're allowed that autonomy when you're Aaron freaking Rodgers. But there's just been a lot of that. And there was a lot of that in this game. The play on the final drive where he completes like the 18-yard pass to Christian Watson, and it's a complete pass. It's a little bit behind Christian, first of all. But secondly, Randall Cobb is streaking wide open on the play. And actually, Allen Lazard, probably even a better option than Watson on the play, also is about to come open behind a linebacker. That one I can understand more if you wanted to wait for Watson to open up. But Cobb comes wide open on the play. There's a play on a third down, actually the one where it was 3rd and 1 and he threw deep to Allen Lazard and it was incomplete. There's a play on that one or on that exact play, Allen Lazard comes open quickly on a slant, just wide open, and he's looking to the right. So Lazard notices that there's not going to be anything inside that he can do anymore, so he loops back around. He gets open again. He gets maybe a half step to a 3/4 step of separation from the corner, and Rodgers overthrows him. There's another play in the red zone where he's looking left and Randall Cobb comes open to the right in the red zone. It ends up being a throwaway. And it's just some of those sort of things in this game that were a little bit frustrating from Aaron. You had the play to Randall Cobb where Cobb's sitting in the flat wide open and he just airmails it. I know he was expecting Cobb to kind of continue down the field, but Cobb was like planted like a tree in the ground and very clearly not going anywhere. And Rodgers just threw it, 20 yards past him. there was just a lot of that in this game. There were some inaccurate passes. There was the one at DeGuara's feet. There was the one on I think the opening pass to Mercedes Lewis that was low and to the right a little bit, or not where Mercedes is kind of expecting it. Just a lot of that from Aaron in this game. Yes, the conditions were windy. Yes, he has a broken thumb. Yes, he's battling bad ribs. So I get all of that. And not an egregious performance by any stretch, but just not your normal Aaron Rodgers ownership of the Bears, high-end performance that we're sort of used to. And like I said, kind of a low-key, actually poor performance from Aaron in this one. And I'll say it again, somewhat understandable considering conditions, ribs, thumb, etc. I give him credit for going out there and playing through that and leading this team. And I truly believe he's probably a huge reason why this team isn't quitting on games and keeps fighting, because they've got Aaron, and Aaron keeps preaching that, hey, we can still get in this thing. And, so credit to him for going out there fighting through things. And listen, if Aaron's not quitting on this team and on this season, when he's got all the injury stuff going on that he does at his age, then nobody else should be either. And I do think that he's kind of leading by example with that. So not his best game. Like I said, also somewhat understandable based on the conditions and his injuries that are sort of piling up. Randall Cobb, the other one in this game, negative 0.25. Not a strong game from Randall. Struggled in blocking, struggled separating. Just not a good game from him. You can tell since he's come back from injury that he hasn't really looked quite the same. I don't know if that's the injuries. I don't know if that's just kind of Father Time catching up on Randall a little bit, but hasn't looked quite the same since coming back from injury. Top 3 graded defenders. I didn't really have anyone that graded out great in this game. Kenny Clark, plus 0.35, had some plays early, drew a holding, had a play late, but also kind of disappeared for a little bit, but had him as my highest graded player, plus 0.35. Like I said, not an all-pro performance or anything like that, but still a sound performance from Kenny and well ahead of where he has been over the last 5 weeks, so positive to see there. Rasul Douglas gave up a completion here and there, but also, was part of the forced fumble. Also had a play up at the line of scrimmage where he made a tackle. And overall throughout the day, actually had pretty sticky coverage in the secondary. So like this performance from Rasul, plus 0.3. And then Adrian Amos, I actually thought he kind of kicks it into another gear sometimes when he plays the Bears. It's been a really tough season for Amos, and he looks, like I said, a step and 3/4 slower than he has in the past. But I actually thought he tackled very well. They played him a little bit more as a box safety in this game. There is the one play where Justin Fields on his big touchdown run, where Amos comes to meet him and the wide receiver kind of lightly blocks him and Fields cuts inside. I watched that play over and over and over. And if you watch it, Amos, understandably, is not expecting at his level to have a wide receiver come and kind of block him at like 20 yards down the field. It's not something that you're sort of expecting at that level. And if you see, like, you watch his eyes and he sees kind of the whole play happening, and he comes up on Justin Fields and is breaking down in the open field to go make a play. And then right as he's kind of going to do that, he all of a sudden, like, he has no visibility on the wide receiver that comes to block him, not expecting it at all. Wide receiver blocks him. Fields cuts inside. He's gone. The rest is history. Could Amos have maybe been more aggressive and come up and try to make a play on Fields? Yes, but sometimes in those situations, you come flying up, Fields makes a move, you go diving right past him and Fields takes off. You're not expecting a receiver to come block you. Probably the better move is to break down, make sure that you make a tackle and that he doesn't get an explosive play. Unfortunately, receiver comes from kind of his blind side. He goes to kind of go with Justin Fields, gets blocked, Fields takes off. The rest is history. I didn't think it was that egregious of a play from Amos the more that I watched it. Could he have, like I said, maybe had better visibility, maybe done more to make an aggressive play? Probably not his, probably finest play ever, but I also have some accident forgiveness just based on how that play developed. And then, but outside of that, I thought he tackled well in this game, and it was probably his best performance of the year, even though, like I said, it wasn't anything overall special, just a plus 0.25 grade. My 3 lowest graded defenders, Jerron Reed, negative 0.8. I thought this was by far and away his toughest game of the season, and one that he will like to bounce back from. He was the only defensive lineman who graded in the negative, and you just haven't really seen that poor of a performance from Reed. Struggled to get any real pass rush, struggled to make an impact in the run game. I thought Wyatt, Slayton, Clark, Lowry, all those guys played better than Reed in this one. Rudy Ford also had a tough game. multiple missed tackle attempts, came up a little too aggressive, like we just talked about that Amos could have done. Came up far too aggressive on a couple tackles and just kind of missed on the play. But as I've talked about, Matt LaFleur's been asking these guys to go out and make mistakes at 1,000,000 miles per hour. If you're going to make mistakes, do it playing fast. And that's what Rudy Ford did. And you know what? He still came up with a fumble recovery. And overall in the season, because he's playing fast, he's making more plays and he's making mistakes. This game, there were a few more mistakes and he didn't have the full, laundry list of plays to sort of make up for it. But I still overall have liked how Rudy Ford's played. Just a bit of a tougher game from him. And then I also thought this was probably JJ Kingsley and Igbare's worst game as well. He struggled to make much of an impact off of the edge, got caught inside a couple times, got thrown to the ground on a couple different occasions, and just really failed to make an impact in this game. So a bit of a struggle for him, not something that we've come accustomed to and not something that he's put on tape so far in his rookie year. This is the time where some of these guys, especially if played more snaps, can start hitting a little bit of a rookie wall. Maybe that's a sign for Enigbare. I'm sure the bye is going to help a lot of these guys, and hopefully Enigbare comes back stronger and better than ever. Last one I'll touch base on really quick. Jair Alexander gave up the 2 explosives. Not okay. It's going to happen. It's part of doing a job, especially when you're on an island more often than not. Happens from time to time. Erase those 2 plays out of your mind, which I'm not giving him forgiveness for. Like, if you want to be a first-team All-Pro, highest-paid corner, want to consider yourself one of the best corners in the league, those things can't happen to EQ and N'Keal Harry of all players. But you take those 2 plays away, I thought he actually played one of his best games of the season. Outside of those 2 plays, I thought he was more aggressive. I thought he was more willing in the run game. I thought he came up and made some plays in the pass game, including that one quick screen where he kind of helped to blow that up, makes a game-winning interception. So I know those plays were flashy plays and big explosive plays, and you don't wipe those from the tape entirely. And he had a very slight positive grade for me, but in large part because of the 2 negative plays. And even though he had one of his best games outside of that, it just took away from it. So, but you watch the rest of his tape and Jair looked like Jair. He was very sticky in coverage outside of that. So it's unfortunate that he gave up the 2 explosives. And like I said, it can't happen, but erase those 2 plays from your mind. And this probably would have been Jair's best game of the season. That's going to do it for me today. Always appreciate you joining me. Like I said, make sure to subscribe if you have not already. I do this 365 days a year, so you're not going to want to miss any future episodes. I will be right back here tomorrow throughout the bye week, and we'll get you all set with a ton of conversations, I'm sure, touching on some off-season stuff, what's gone wrong, what's gone right, and a lot of other stuff this next couple weeks. So make sure to check it out. I'll be right back here tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.